Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Auscontact's national gold sponsor Verint. And it's entitled IVAs, How They Work and Should You Buy or Build. Over the next 60 minutes or so, with the help of today's special guest, Ian Beaver, PhD, Chief Scientist from Verint, we hope you'll be asking lots of questions, reflecting on your approach, as well as taking some gold back to your respective organisations. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact, and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us today, let's use the time wisely to quickly run through some housekeeping, which will enable you to interact with us, to maximise the benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes now, because we'll be providing you with the slides and recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please click the Q&A on the control panel, as you can see on the screen, and then type your questions. You can ask questions and or make comments for Ian or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're going to be having a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you're anything like me, I need to type the questions during the webinar, otherwise I'll forget to ask them. I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's try out the questions pane on the control panel now, just in case. And the question for today is, are Verint a national gold sponsor of Auscontact? You can just answer Y or N or yes or no or yippee they are, or whatever it is you want to answer. So let's see if someone's going to actually, oh, I love it. So someone said yes. They want to be anonymous though. Thanks, Sam. Leanne, good answer. Well done. We found some people that know how to answer the question. That's brilliant. Okay, Lara's also said yes. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so if you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can actually click to raise your hand, which kind of is counterintuitive, but anyway, and someone from the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. Failing that, you can actually switch to the telephone. It means you'll need to go back to the email where the link was sent to get the toll-free number and all of the information to rejoin us. So with that, I'm pleased to get you to do some more work. Did I hear a virtual groan? Of course not. So let's launch our poll, please, Jess. And the poll is, do you have an intelligent virtual assistant or chatbot live or an initiative underway? And your options are, we have an intelligent virtual assistant, we have a chatbot, we have both. The initiative is either underway or we have no current plans. Ian, while we've got our fantastic attendees answering this question, you are based in the US, so you would have enormous experience and exposure. What are you actually seeing is going on in the marketplace?
Yeah, there's some confusion about the terminology between chatbots and virtual assistants, and I'll actually talk to that in my presentation, try to clear up some of those differences. But there's, I think, a lot of AI initiatives that are being rolled out where people say, we need AI, we need a chatbot, we need some sort of automation. And CTOs and such are tasked with these sort of demands by their boards or their executives, and they go to these conferences, many of conferences which I attend or speak at, and they're just told to buy something. And so they do, and they buy something, and they deploy it, and then it typically ends in failure. And so there are many analysts out there, you know, Gartner, Forrester, these typical types of industry analysts that are showing that there are many failures are very common in the deployment of these technologies. And so I'm also going to talk to that a little bit too. Why is that, and how can we sort of mitigate some of that? So really, I think most large organizations have initiatives being discussed and being demanded, if not already bought and deployed. But we're seeing more and more, I guess, second round customers now, where people have come to us that they just got something, or they built something themselves, and it was sort of some form of a failure, and so they're looking for maybe how do we salvage this, or how do we build on what we had invested in that thing. And so we are seeing a very busy marketplace in this space.
Fantastic. Well, Jess, if you could close the poll and let's see what our attendees are telling us. Okay, so not many people, not of our attendees have an intelligent virtual assistant. Chatbot is a bit more common. 14% have both. Interesting that there's an absolute balance between initiative being underway or no current plans at 29%. Any of those numbers surprise you, Ian?
Not really. I mean, this is kind of what we're seeing. There's people are either talking about it or doing it. I am a little surprised there are some people that have both, just because we typically see one or the other, but it is happening now that organizations have different departments doing their own thing. And so Department A might have built their own chatbot solution or something, while Department B may have went out and bought a virtual assistant or maybe built one themselves. And the executives are then trying to get those two departments to compromise or pick a solution. So this is definitely happening.
Fantastic. Well, Ian, welcome to the Auscontact community. You've spoken a little bit, but you're a brand new voice. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then take us through the meaty content of today's webinar?
Well, thank you. I came from a company called Next IT Corporation, who has been building custom virtual assistants on behalf of large companies, organizations. We really started out in the government agency space for the last 18 years. And I've been there for a little over 13 of those years. We build virtual assistants. They're omni-channel, meaning that they can talk over really any channel that you could talk to a human on. We can figure out how to communicate with an IVA over that. We support deep backend integrations, things like flight search databases or customer account databases or any type of form submission engines or anything like that, knowledge bases we can do custom integrations with. Really, our first product, like I said, was in the government space here in the States. It was actually an agent for Internet Relay Chat. If any of you remember IRC, it is actually still around. But it was actually for the U.S. Customs, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They were tasked at the time with being the police of the Internet. They kind of still are, but as far as the United States is concerned. And they were trying to figure out how do they, with their very few agents available, really keep tabs on all of the conversations that are happening across to IRC. And so we built these chatbots that would really essentially patrol the conversations being had over IRC and look for bad guys and look for people that are doing these transactions that the ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, would be interested in. Surface those people to them, and they would jump in a conversation with that person and set up sting operations and things. So we kind of morphed from there into more enterprise customer service and product support and things. But me personally, as I said, I joined Next IT in 2006. Next IT Corporation was acquired by Verint about 2 years ago, so we're still pretty new in the Verint family. We're part of a business unit called Intelligent Self-Service, where we work with several other companies that have been acquired over the last several years that all have different solutions to the self-service space, and we kind of build a singular product that encompasses all of those things. As a chief scientist, I run the research group, so we do what you consider more peer research. We also have an applied research wing that is building more prototypes and proof of concepts. But we do sort of experimental work where we do actual studies. We take data, we look at it, we try to figure out how can we detect and resolve misunderstandings between humans and machines automatically, or what are the features of misunderstandings. We look for ways to optimize human productivity through automation, augmentation. We're not necessarily trying to always replace humans. A lot of times it's like, how do we take a human and make them more productive? Maybe have a machine that takes over the easy parts of their job, but they're now tasked with more complex, or the things that require knowledge, logic, and reasoning. So that's really where I'm at and where I come from. So given that, today I'm going to talk to you about IVAs, where they fit with other natural language technologies you may have heard about, and some of the trade-offs between building your own or buying one. Let's see if I can get, and let's see if I can get back to the slideshow here. Okay, there we go, back on track. So conversational interfaces, they're kind of an umbrella term. You may hear, or conversational AI is another one that you're hearing more and more these days. And it encompasses several families of natural language interface technologies. The first one we kind of talked about a little bit already, chatbots. It's a general term. It's used interchangeably a lot of times with virtual assistants and other technologies that I'll mention. But classically, and in sort of in academic circles, chatbots has a specific meaning. The first chatbot that was really, I guess, viable was ELIZA, which was built back in the 1960s. And they've been continually evolving since then. But the purpose of a chatbot is really to have a topical conversation or to gather information without necessarily taking any actions on behalf of the user. So this is where your classical sort of frequently asked questions, FAQ type bots live. The user has a question, they ask it, the bot answers it. You know, you're just providing information to the user, but there's not necessarily any complex workflows. There's typically not deep backend integrations into you know, enterprise systems. They're just really there for informational purposes or entertainment purposes. The next category most people are very familiar with is intelligent personal assistants. And this is your Apple Siri on your smartphone, the Google Assistant on the Android phone. This also encompasses smart speakers, so Google Home, Alexa, these type of things. And really, these exist to support the needs of an individual. So they're there to help you accomplish tasks in your day-to-day life, whether that's schedule appointments on your calendar, look up recipes, home automation, like lock your doors, turn on your lights, those sorts of things. You can think of them like a digital secretary. They're really there to support you. So the last category that sort of falls under this umbrella is intelligent virtual assistants, or you might hear them called intelligent virtual agents. And this is really what I'm going to spend the rest of the day talking about. And the differences here between the previous ones are they're really a natural language interface to a system or an organization. You can think of them like a virtual employee. They're there to represent a company or to represent an agency. And they talk to many users, not just, they're not just there for your personal, secretary. They're typically domain specific, which means they're integrated specifically into a domain like, insurance or finance or healthcare or something like that. And they're designed to perform complex tasks within their specialty. So an insurance agent might be able to help you with claims processing or help answer questions about your policy, for example. So those are kind of the differences. They're subtle, and like I said, a lot of times you'll hear these things sort of used interchangeably, but classically there are differences between them, and the technologies really that are used to build these things can vary quite a bit. So what is an IVA? What does it look like? Like I said, IVAs are really around task-oriented dialogue. So you're talking to an IVA when you're trying to do something. You're trying to get something done, not necessarily just to get information, although they can provide you with just information. Many times you're trying to get specific information or to do something with that information. So here's an example of a banking IVA. This would exist on some bank's website or maybe in their mobile application. And the first thing I want you to notice about this is the virtual assistant is creating contextual questions or answers for the user. So it says, welcome back, Alex. I see you're searching for information on IRAs. How can I help you with that? So what has happened here is Alex has to be logged in to the website or to the mobile application or something. And they must have clicked on a link regarding IRAs, or maybe they're on their IRA webpage and they clicked on a help bubble or something that launched the virtual assistant. The virtual assistant understands the context that it has been launched within. So the fact that they're looking at IRAs and who it's talking to. Now, not all IVAs are on sites that have login information. For example, we have an IVA on the US Army's website where it doesn't know who you are, but it is certainly answering questions based on which page you're currently navigated to. So Alex says, what's the balance of my IRA? And here we have personalized interaction. So because of the deep integrations that virtual assistants have with backend databases and systems, the IVA is able to go look up Alex's account, figure out what type of an IRA they even have, and what balance there is. Now, if Alex had maybe a Roth IRA and a traditional 401k or something, at this point, the IVA would ask a clarifier and say, well, which account are you interested in, your Roth or your 401k? But we assume they must have one. Your Roth IRA has a balance of $10,000. Is there anything else I can help you with? So we're able to take information from these backend systems through these integrations and use it to answer the user's question and even help them make changes to these backend systems. Notice this is all happening through natural conversation. So the IVA is not trying to force Alex down a specific tree or lead them down a path or give them a set of predefined questions that they have to ask, like please select from one of the following. It's just saying, how can I help you with that? Is there anything else I can help you with? This open-ended natural conversation is really one of the big benefits of sort of a larger IVA, which allows people to talk in people language. You don't have to talk in machine language. So Alex asked, how much money did I invest this year? And here's another demonstration of a backend integration. So an IVA can be integrated with a knowledge base, which maybe has articles or support topics or things that, given the relevance to the question that was asked, it can find an article that might be helpful for the user and present that. So your 2018 IRA contribution is $2,000. Now notice here, this question is actually ambiguous. How much money did I invest this year? If that was asked in isolation, we would have no idea what they're talking about because we don't know really the context. So the only way that the IVA is able to actually accurately answer that question is by looking at the previous context of the conversation so far and deduce the fact that we are talking about Alex's Roth IRA, and therefore when Alex makes a comment like how much money did I invest this year, he or she means specifically in their IRA balance or their IRA account. So again, it just shows that these are subtle, but the virtual assistants they're really having to do fairly complex things. And machines do not do this automatically. You have to teach them how to do this, which I'll talk about later. And finally, they support multiple modalities. So Alex could be talking to the virtual assistant through an app on their smartphone. This could be typed in over the website or touched through an interface of some kind. They can integrate with Facebook, Twitter, whatever you can talk to another human over the phone. You can think of a way, or you can create an interface where we can communicate with a virtual assistant. So here's another example of a live virtual assistant on a website. And this is really just to show that the virtual assistant's response can be quite a bit more than just a textual response. So here we see the user's turn in the conversation. How can I take more than one bag on a plane? And the agent response is actually composed of several things here. So the agent directly answers the question by giving carry on and dimensions and things. But it also suggests some alternative topics. And these things might be related to what the user asked. It might be things maybe the user actually meant when they said what they did. So there are this idea of suggesting other topics or questions. An example, or in addition, the user's browser is actually being navigated by the IVA, and they have pushed the website the web page on the site that is giving the dimensions for carry-on baggage and things to give the user additional information about the topic. So a response from a virtual agent can be much more than just text. It can give you alternative suggestions and things, as well as pushing content. It could be navigating you as creating changes on the mobile application, giving you, a navigation screen in Google Maps or something like that. All those things can be done as part of the response of a virtual assistant. So now that I've talked a bit about what an IVA is, I'm going to spend some time talking about how they work. This feeds into the discussion of what it takes to actually build one on your own and what others will be building on your behalf. So really the core thing here that a virtual assistant has to do in the beginning is determine what is the user's intention by what they just said. And you'll see this a lot of times abbreviated as intent. So if you hear about intents, how many intents do you recognize, those sort of things. The definition is really the interpretation of a statement or question that allows one to formulate the best possible response. So that is, why are you asking this? What is it that you're after with what you just said? So within IVAs, how this is implemented is similar to a classification task. If you're familiar with information retrieval or machine learning, you're really given a bunch of possible intents, which is really the scope of knowledge of the IVA, and it has to say, is what was just said, which of these intents that I know about was what you just said, or is this something I don't know about? That's really the task that's being performed. So for example, if someone were to say, can I bring my dog with me on board to a travel IVA? The user intent label might be, what's the pet policy? And specifically for dogs, if the knowledge of the IVA, this particular IVA, is that granular. So how this works, sort of the data flow within the internals of an IVA is if you are using a voice channel, so if you're talking over a phone or through a mobile application or something in which you have a speech input, that first has to get transcribed into a text representation. So that audio signal comes in to an automatic speech recognition engine, the ASR, and the output of that is going to be the textual form of what was just said. That text is then sent to that classification task I was just talking about, which happens in what's considered the natural language understanding component, or the NLU. And its job is to pick what is the appropriate user intention given this text I just received. Once you've determined the intention, there's a dialogue management component that tries to figure out, okay, based on the context of the conversation we're having, what's happened so far in the conversation based on maybe the web page the user is currently on, or what I know about this intention, what actions, if any, do I need to perform? And so actions might be just simply to respond. Like if you're asking a question for just a factual response, that's all the action that needs to happen. If it's like you're asking a question about, say, your account balance, like in that banking example, the virtual assistant then knows it has to go out and perform a query on the database, the account database, to get at that piece of information so that it can formulate the appropriate response. Other actions might be if it needs to, say, book a flight on your behalf, or if it needs to authenticate you, or if it needs to do something. Or it could just be, does it need to clarify? So maybe multiple intentions came out of the NLU as all equally probable. And so it has to say, well, I'm not sure which of these you really meant. So the action might be to clarify which of these intentions did you mean. And so the virtual assistant will say something like, did you mean account balance, or did you mean, account transfer, or something like that? So once it is determined what action to perform and the user's intention, these go into what's known as the natural language generation component. And its job is to take those things and figure out how to respond appropriately to the user. So this will generate the response text, and there's many ways that this can be implemented. You could do just static responses, so all the responses are predetermined ahead of time. They could be templatized, so pieces of it can be dynamically generated, such as like account balance or something like that, or compositing different templates together to form a complex response. There are many different ways this can be implemented, but the idea is, given the intent and the action, out comes the response. That response, if you're speaking over an audio channel, then needs to be converted into an audio signal, where you would use a text-to-speech engine, the TTS, which takes that response text and essentially reads it to the user using some form of a human voice. So these two boxes on the left that are in white are really, they only exist if the user is speaking over an audio channel. So if they're typing, in a live chat type setting on a website, those two components wouldn't exist. You would just get the text directly to the NLU, and the response text would be directly shown to the user in the interface. So that's basically the inner workings. There's a lot of complexity that's hidden here. The dialogue management component, it could have many components within itself to interface into backend systems or to make determinations. The NLU can be implemented many different ways through either machine learning or symbolic approaches, ontologies. And so there's a lot of complexity here that is sort of, you don't see it in this diagram, but the idea is these are the main components that are involved in taking in textual input, deciding what to do with it, how to respond to that, and getting that back to the user. So the next thing is really, once these things are deployed, you have an IVA, you have an enterprise deployment that you've got it out there on your website, it's launched within a mobile application that you're maintaining. That's really just the beginning of a long-term relationship that you're going to maintain with this IVA. So this is something that you really don't hear much about. And that is because people are so focused on building an accurate virtual assistant, and getting it deployed and understanding the use cases and all that stuff, that once it's out there, all the sexiness is kind of gone, right? Now it's just out there and it's doing its thing. But really, this is just the beginning, because you have to continually review what is happening with these virtual assistants and personal assistants. The refinement is necessary for a lot of reasons. For one, language is continually evolving over time. So before smartphones were really ubiquitous, we didn't see a lot of sort of SMS abbreviation type text coming through. But after everybody had a smartphone, when the iPhone came out and everybody started texting each other all day, we started seeing people communicate with virtual assistants like through text. They would abbreviate things the same way they would with text. The other major change we saw was when Twitter really took off and a lot of people started using Twitter. That sort of changed the way people communicated in a chat setting, even with virtual assistants. And so we will get people basically throwing out hashtag this or hashtag that to our virtual assistants, which is really kind of weird if you think about it, but it fundamentally changed the way people communicated. So these language evolutions are continually happening, and these virtual assistants have to be continually improved or changed to be able to handle those language changes. The other thing that happens all the time is products are released or products are sunsetted, and virtual assistants that are representing your products or your company or maybe some other agency or something that needs to know about policy changes or something has to be kept up to date. So if a new policy comes out for a government agency, the virtual assistant has to know about that policy and how to respond to people's questions about that policy, and those changes have to be incorporated. There's market changes, competitors appear and disappear, websites are changed. So if a virtual assistant as part of its response is navigating the user to different areas of the website, and you go and revamp the website, you have to keep the virtual assistant in sync with that so it's not pushing people to 404 pages. There's also demographic changes in your user base. There's lots of things that happen in it's a live environment. And so these virtual assistants, they have to really kind of be babysat. So as the virtual assistant's out there talking to these users, it's generating these conversation logs. And typically what happens is there's some sampling method that's used to select some of these things, and human reviewers go over that. And you might have seen in the news a lot lately that companies like Apple and Google are now allowing people to opt out of being part of that review sample for privacy concerns. And the general public is actually quite surprised to learn that humans have to review these interactions continuously. And it's really just a part of the nature of the beast. The fact that you have a virtual assistant out there in this changing environment means you have to be continually refining it. And so the only way to make sure that it's actually behaving like a human is to have humans look at how it's behaving and judge whether or not changes are necessary. So these reviewers do that, and they grade those conversations based on how well they thought the virtual assistant was understanding the user's problem and helping the user. If there was any new vocabulary or product changes or something that the virtual assistant needs to know about, all of that information is then sent to what is on the slide here as domain experts. But these are the people that are really responsible for maintaining that virtual assistant's knowledge base and the language models. And they take that reviewed information and they determine what changes are necessary and how those changes need to be made. They fix the language model, make the changes, and they deploy that back to the virtual assistant, and now its knowledge has been updated. And this cycle continues indefinitely, and there are virtual assistants that stay in fairly static domains, that maybe the cycle only completes once a month or once every 2 months. There might be virtual assistants that are deployed in a very dynamic space where the cycle is happening maybe every 3 or 4 days. So it really is implementation dependent, but the cycle needs to happen. Otherwise, over time, the virtual assistant will be less and less helpful to its users, and people will just stop using it because it doesn't know what they're talking about. So here's just some examples of challenges associated with natural language processing. So these are some examples from live IVAs out there on the internet. The first one here is a travel IVA, and the user input is, I need a new ticket, my dog ate my last one. So that's probably a contrived example, but it's to represent the fact that just how you say something can cause confusion within these virtual assistants. So the virtual assistant interprets this to mean you want to buy a ticket for your dog. So it says you can travel with your pet for a $100 fee. You know, you can add a pet to your ticket, call reservations, and so on. So the user was after a new ticket, and the dog aiding it was just the justification for why that new ticket was needed. But that additional language was enough to confuse the virtual assistant. So a conversation like this would be reviewed. They would say, nope, that was not the right intent, that was not the right response, and then the changes would be made to improve that and deployed. So here's another example from another live IVA out there. It says, I can help you with all things SIM only. So this is a telephone support. Where would you like to start? The user says, I dropped my phone last week when I was on vacation and I bought a new phone. Can I swap my SIM? So the user has a question related to SIMs, which the IVA says they can help with all things SIM. But because of the information about a broken phone, dropping a phone, the IVA misunderstands and thinks the user is asking about, how to insure their phone against breakage. So it says you can find out more about how to insure your phone on our website. So again, that additional language, which is really actually relational in nature, explaining, the backstory of why they have the question or the justification of why they have the demand, is causing confusion in these virtual assistants. And so here's just some real examples of how natural language processing is hard for machines, and they require really constant babysitting. So now that I've covered the terminology and the background of IVAs, I'm going to talk about the considerations that need to be made to create and deploy one. So the first thing is, really, what are my options? And there's sort of two main roads you could go down. There is building your own in some capacity, or there is buying a solution in some capacity. And under both of these, there are options. So under the first, this is building your own under some capacity. There are a lot of companies out there that offer these APIs. And these APIs are meant to take away a lot of the complexity of the model selection and design and architecture, and hide that sort of the machine learning aspects from you. So really all you have to do is provide them with data and what it is you're trying to do. So with most of these APIs, what you're responsible for is defining the set of intents that you would like the IVA to know, giving them example language of how people might ask about that intent, and potentially giving them some example responses of how you might respond to such an intent. So you might do all this in an Excel spreadsheet or something, but you might do that through their programming language or whatever they provide you with, depending on the API. But the idea is that you are defining the knowledge and giving examples of how that knowledge is queried and how that knowledge should be responded to, and they take care of constructing the models for you, and you upload that data to them. So in many cases, this is off-site, so they own the data. It's on their servers, they process it, they create the models, and then you call that model from your live IVA with the user's input. It goes off, the model says, you know, this was the intent and this is how we should respond, and that comes back, and it's up to you to create the interface, the client side, whether it's a mobile application or a website, or however you're exposing the IVA to a user, you still have to do all that work. You are also responsible for how you want to report on that information and store those conversations and refine that data. But the idea is they've taken away a lot of the sort of the complex NLP and machine learning work from you. So here's some examples. I'm not endorsing any of these. These are just common examples that everybody has heard of. WhatAI, which is owned by Facebook, IBM Watson Assistant, and Dialogflow, and there's many others. But this is really sort of the API category of the build your own. The next category are the full-on, you do everything yourself. So these are the open source toolkits that are available out there. So there's tons of them, and they're in all different programming languages. These are some of the more famous ones you'll probably hear about, Spacey and Keras, PyTorch and Rasa. These are all machine learning and natural language processing toolkits, but it's up to you now to decide how you want to build the models of language and the intent classification, and how you want to build the models of response generation. And you have to put all the code together yourself and hook it all up on top of the still having to build the client side and maintain the database and the reporting structures and all those things. So this is really the full-on doing everything yourself. And this is where you'll need specialists, machine learning engineers, and natural language processing or linguists. And I'll talk about sort of the the team requirements in my next slide. But this is the, it's all on you. Moving over to the buy category, there's also levels there too. So the first level is there are pre-built packages available. These are essentially things, sort of quick start packages to help you get something stood up in a hurry. They're models that have been pre-trained in a specific domain. So for example, in insurance or in banking, or maybe some sort of a help desk ticket or HR agent. So there are language models that have already been constructed in a generic form, and all you have to do is sort of that last mile of customization. So you take that and say, okay, how do we want to respond to this? How do we customize this specific to our products? So some examples of this, Verint offers what are called IVA starter packs. There's also many other companies out there that have these sort of pre-built packages that you can buy. And they're really there to stand them up quickly. So that typically these things can be deployed within a matter of weeks. And the sort of the Cadillac plan is the fully custom developed IVA. And so this is where NextIT really lived. We build custom solutions on behalf. They're designed and built completely based on your users, your use cases. They contain any custom workflows and company-specific implementation that's necessary. It's very much a white glove approach. We come in, we do everything. We will even maintain the thing for you. We'll even host it for you if you want. That's sort of the all batteries included. So you have the whole spectrum sort of represented here. And there are things in between. And obviously there's other companies that offer similar solutions. So these are kind of your options when it comes to how do I get an IVA. Here's sort of what you need to support an IVA. So these are the staffing needs. So on the build side, if you're going to do it yourself, this is not all inclusive, but these are sort of the primary roles that you're going to have to supply. You're going to need a subject matter expert, an SME. This is the person that really understands the task that you're trying to automate. You're going to need product manager to maintain this thing. You're going to need natural language processing folks and linguists, machine learning engineers, UX and CX designers. This is very important because IVAs don't live in a bubble. They're typically deeply integrated into your website, into your mobile applications. And so a user experience or customer experience designer has to look at sort of the overall experience and how IVAs are going to help users out across the website and things. You're going to need a front-end developer to build the client side. You'll need a back-end developer to do the database integrations and the back-end integrations. Mobile developer, if you want a mobile application. You're going to need a database administrator and engineers that figure out how to store all this conversational data and report on it. You'll need DevOps to make sure everything's up and running and supported. On the buy side, you still actually need some staff, but it's obviously reduced. So you still need the subject matter experts regardless, because those are the people that really understand the problem that's trying to be solved and how you as a company want to represent sort of these use cases. You'll also need some sort of a product owner or a champion that internally is the liaison between the external company you're hiring to do the work and your internal company, and trying to make sure that requirements are gathered correctly and that they're really building for you what you want them to build for you. Many companies allow you to self-host these solutions, so they'll just essentially sell you the software and you can maintain it on your own hardware or in your own cloud environment. And if that's the case, you're going to need DBAs and DevOps to make sure those things are up and running and to maintain the databases and stuff. If you're going to do any really deep backend integrations with your own internal systems, typically you're going to need a backend developer that can help expose APIs or something to the company you're hiring so that they can call into those systems and get the stored procedures or whatever needed to get the data out or make the changes necessary. IT is typically involved with this too, and again, you'll need the DBA. So this is just really sort of to give you an idea of the type of people that are involved in standing up an IVA and maintaining it. So here's sort of a checklist you can go through to really decide whether building or buying makes sense. So on the building side, if you have a large software organization already that has lots of these skill sets sort of floating around, for example, Bank of America here in the States, they launched a virtual assistant, a pretty deeply integrated one, and they put together a team of over 100 people to build that completely themselves. They did it all through, the sort of the open source route. But they had a lot of those people already internally sort of floating around. They just pulled them together into a team. So if you have that capacity, then building your own might be an option. If the use case is basically what would be supported by a chatbot, like it's just statements of information delivery, you're just simply answering questions. You're not doing any integrations. You're not doing any really complicated workflows. Those are more easily built. If you have a small number of clearly separable intents to maintain, that typically means the complexity of the language model is low, and so that these APIs that are out there can handle those easier. If the impact of a wrong response is minimal, you're not going to get sued if you tell somebody maybe something's wrong, some confusion in the IVA. Or if you're just dealing with a single language, those are a lot easier to deal with than multi-language support. So if you answer yes to a lot of those questions, then building your own is certainly an option. Realize, of course, you still have to do all the client side development and everything. On the buying end, if building the organization to support that IVA you're going to have to go out and hire all those specialized people who are very expensive, by the way. At that point, it might make more sense just to go hire a company that already has those people to do the work for you. If you have really complex workflows that require stateful conversations, like booking a flight on behalf of the user or complicated account management, a lot of times it's best to let companies that have already done that work before for other companies come in and do that. If you have a large number of intents to maintain or there's significant language overlap between them, that's where these sort of these APIs that are available out there really start to break down. We have some customers that have tens of thousands of intents in their language models, and we have to use very sort of complicated language processing tricks to be able to make all of that work together without a lot of confusion. If you have regulatory compliance needs, so we work in a lot of healthcare and insurance banking spaces that we have to carry a lot of these regulation certifications and things. And getting certified a lot of times is very expensive and very time consuming. And so it might be best just to hire a company that's already gone through the whole certification process rather than you getting your personal home built IVA certified. Or if you need multi-language support, that opens up a whole can of worms. It's much more complicated to do that successfully. So these are all situations where bringing in a company that has the experience with previous success stories and other companies that are similar to yours to help you build these things quickly and efficiently may be a better use of your money than trying to put together a team to build your own. So here's some quick takeaways based on sort of what I've covered. So one of the things we see a lot of is really people don't know where to start. They're just told they need an AI, they need a chatbot, they need whatever. But what you don't want to do is just go out and buy something and implement it, because like a lot of these analysts have been saying, there is a huge amount of failure in those scenarios because they weren't well designed. So what you want to do is identify the use cases where automation is needed before you decide whether building or buying, because this will help you understand what is it going to take to automate these things? What is the level of effort we're going to have to go through to do this? And this is really how you kind of do that. You want to get together any sort of representative data that you have laying around that would be in the same vein that this IVA is going to be taking over. So if you're going to build an IVA to handle email support routing, say, or HR questions or things like that, get all the data you have around there. If you're going to have a customer service IVA on your website, maybe get any live chat transcripts or telephone transcripts or call center data you can, and analyze it. Get some analysts to look at it. Try to figure out what are the most common contact scenarios and how difficult would it be to automate those scenarios. So after you understand the primary use cases that this IVA is going to have to support and how complex they are, then you can more fairly determine if building or buying makes more sense. And if you don't have the analyst that can do this, or you're not really sure even there where to start, we offer a one-time flat fee consulting service called AI Blueprint. And this is really doing this analysis work for you. We just simply do the work and give you the results, and it's up to you. You can do whatever you want with those results. But what we do is we fly people in on site to your place. We take your data, we do analysis on it using a bunch of tooling that we've developed over the years to do this conversational analysis. And we provide you a report that basically says, here's the low-hanging fruit in this area. So these are the areas that we think are ripe for automation. We think you should start here, and you can always add complexity on to those areas after the fact. So that's always an option too. If the the conversational analysis is not something you feel comfortable doing. The second thing I really want you to remember is just understanding that the maintenance needs of these things after they're deployed. So whether you build it yourself or you buy it from someone, getting a working IVA is really just the first step in this long-term relationship. IVAs, they need just ongoing love and care. Like you have to give them maintenance and attention because, like I said, language is continually evolving, products are changing, markets are changing, competitors are changing, your website's changing, your demographics change. So whatever solution that you go with, make sure that there is a means to accomplish this ongoing refinement process, along with just getting an IVA. A lot of companies focus so much on just selling you the IVA that after it's out there in live, you realize there's really not a lot of tooling around how to evaluate how well this thing is doing and how do we make changes to it as necessary to really support it. So the ecosystem around the IVA is really just as important as the IVA itself. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fiona.
Wow, Ian. Thank you. That was incredibly comprehensive. And I guess for many of us on the webinar it's a case of we didn't know what we didn't know regarding whether to build or buy. And there's a lot of moving parts as you go down that path of making that decision. The good news is we do have some questions, which is fantastic. The bad news is, Ian, they're anonymous. So, first question. At what scale does voice-based complex self-service become viable via IVAs?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to take this and I'm going to take the viable as probably a cost question, or at what point does it make sense to do that in an affordable way? So it's really going to depend on your call volume or how much traffic you're seeing or you're projecting to see over that channel. So for example, if you have a 1,000-seat call center that is handling, just thousands of calls per day, launching an IVA into that space that can just handle the simple stuff, like maybe the password reset use case, that might be 40% of your call volume, say. That would be a huge ROI for a company that is operating at that space. If you have a small business and you're getting 5 calls a day, I'll tell you right now, it is not worth it to go through the pain of trying to build and deploy and maintain an IVA for that type of volume. So really, it's a function of how much is it costing you, or how much pain are you going through right now, voice channel, to decide how effective or how much really gain you're going to get by automating portions of that channel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess, Ian, to that point, it would be about doing the analytics before you make that decision, so you really understand the drivers in your business, because, as you said up front, there are a lot of people that go to conferences with very deep pockets, and they just buy things because the boss said this is a really good thing for me to buy. So it's really understanding your business that should be underpinning any of those decisions. Yep. So we have another anonymous question. I love these. Okay, what are the differences between IVA and conversational AI?
So conversational AI is really more of a broader term. It's sort of an umbrella term that encompasses everything from chatbots and smart speakers and personal assistants and virtual assistants. So a virtual assistant, you can consider that to be like a subset or a specific instance of conversational AI.
Okie dokie. Well, we have another anonymous question, and this is a long question. It says here, let me read it to you. In terms of industry standard regarding bots failing to recognize questions due to words used, is machine learning used to correct that, or is much of it still done by humans?
So this is where, when I was talking about the IVA internals on that slide, I said there are many ways that the natural language understanding component can be implemented. So this is going to be one of those depends questions, because if you have built your NLUs purely through machine learned mechanisms, like you have a neural network or something that is doing the intent classification, then the ability to add new words to that is going to be collecting training data where those new words are used, and then retraining your model with that data incorporated so that it now knows what those words are. There are hybrid models as well that use components of machine learning and use symbolic or ontology approaches to help deal with vocabulary issues, or if you recognize a word that's out of vocabulary within the machine learned model, you can call out to an ontology or something, or a dictionary or something, to see if maybe you can find its definition there and then take a stab at trying to understand how it's being used. But for the most part, it's going to be very implementation specific, whether that is those out of vocabulary words are being learned or they're being added manually.
Okay, so this is a question that actually links back to the poll a little bit. So I'll do a little bit of pre-positioning. So you talked about the latest trends that you're seeing in the US market with respect to IVAs. Maybe you can just remind us of that. But what's contributed to the market adoption of such technologies?
I think there's a couple things. For one, it's really that users are starting to feel comfortable talking to these things. So way back in the day when NextIT was a young company, and I could count on one hand the number of companies that existed that were building these things. Today, I think, depending on what analyst you look at, there's something like, people quote numbers like 1,500 different companies out there that are in the chatbot virtual assistant space. So that adoption has just exploded as far as the number of providers, but also people have become just a lot more used to communicating with virtual assistants, with the with Siri, with Alexa, with Google Assistant, you know, Samsung Bixby, all these you know, smartphones now have virtual assistants built in. People are used to talking to those. People have smart speakers at their home. They're used to talking to those. So as humans become more and more comfortable with talking to virtual assistants, it's really led a sort of adoption, which has in turn created all these companies which are building them. So it's kind of that evolution. I'm not sure exactly what's driving it, but I would say that it's on both sides. It's the fact that with so much competition in these different companies, it's getting much easier to create, build, deploy, implement virtual assistants. And on the user side, users are much more comfortable with talking to them. So companies are realizing it's not such a risk to deploy these automated solutions because people are already comfortable with communicating with them.
Okay, thank you. We have one lucky last question because that's really all we have time for, Ian. And it's asking for a recommendation. Do you recommend providing IVA alongside a traditional digital self-service channel, such as an app or website, or should the IVA replace the traditional channel?
So if you've got an app or a website that's up there and functional, I wouldn't recommend taking it down. If you have other means of self-service as well, such as voice of the customer, or you know, these other, if you have a forum or something like that where users can communicate with each other, I wouldn't shut those things down in place of a virtual assistant. But what can happen is the virtual assistant can actually drive those things. So like I was showing how the virtual assistant can actually navigate the user's browser through your website. So that information may exist on your website, but the users may not be able to quickly find it. So they ask the virtual assistant. The virtual assistant can find it for them and push that information to their browser automatically as they're going through the natural flow of the conversation. So they can actually work very well together. So I would not tear out something you've got to replace it with a virtual assistant, unless for some reason that solution is costing you like a crazy amount of money based on whoever's hosting that for you or something, and it's an either or from a financial standpoint. But for the most part, IVAs play very nicely with other technologies and can even drive those technologies. So they're a great add-on to existing self-service solutions.
Thank you. Well, with that, Ian, I'm going to ask you if you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make as we bring the webinar to a close.
So this is my contact information here, and you can, you know, look up Verint and NextIT we have a blog there where we post things on the stuff. And so if you have any questions that you come up with after this event and stuff, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to talk to you and answer any of those questions that you have. And that's really all I got.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you for sharing your insights today. I'm so looking forward to our next instalment on the 6th of December, which is internal AI agent assist. We're going to cover some examples of human IVA hybrid workforce within the contact centre that makes CSAs more efficient and effective. So with that, Ian, thank you for staying up late. It sounds like that cup of coffee did the trick. And to all of our attendees, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day wherever you might be. Thanks, everyone. See you on the 6th.